I was only looking for a charger. My hand went into his gym bag, and when it came out, I was holding a second phone. In that moment, every ordinary sound in our home, coffee dripping, the dog's tags, the soft click of a lamp, seemed to step back, and the only thing I could hear was the quiet between us, already changing shape. If you've ever shared years under one roof, you know that kind of silence. It doesn't shout, it settles. This isn't a story about scandal. It's about what comes after the long, careful work of two grown men learning to speak again, and the small acts that turned us toward each other. There's a happy ending here. Not perfect, but honest. It all started with a second phone. A sleek, anonymous black rectangle I found tucked in his gym bag while I was looking for a car charger. For a whole week, I said nothing. The phone wasn't the betrayal. Not really. It was just a symbol of it. The real wound was the sudden, terrifying knowledge that the man I'd built my life with had a whole other life I knew nothing about. The architecture of our marriage, something I thought was made of solid oak, suddenly felt like it was built on sand. When I finally confronted him, my words were quiet, exhausted. "What is this, Caleb?" I didn't yell. The silence had already sucked all the oxygen out of the room. The confession wasn't a dramatic, plate-smashing affair. It was a quiet, crumbling demolition of everything I thought was true. An affair, not a one-time mistake, but a secret that had been unraveling in a world parallel to ours. He said he'd ended it. He said he was sorry. But sorry was just a word, and words had lost all their meaning. Trust isn't a switch you can just flip back on. It's a living thing, and in our house, it had starved to death. The weeks that followed were an exercise in cohabitation. We were two ghosts haunting the beautiful home he had so lovingly designed for us, moving around each other with a painful, practiced choreography. We were polite, we were considerate, we were anything but husbands. Every notification on his phone, every time he came home late, every unreadable expression was a new crack in an already shattered foundation. That kind of betrayal rewrites your memories, making you question every happy moment you thought you shared. The first step toward healing wasn't a conversation. It wasn't some grand gesture. It was coffee. A week into the crushing silence, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee, a single mug left on my side of the bed, just the way I like it. Caleb was already gone for work. There was no note, no expectation. The next morning, it was there again, and the next. This small, consistent act became the first word in our new language. It was his way of showing me, not just telling me, that he was trying. It was a quiet, daily promise that said, "I am still here. I know I messed up." It was an apology he made without speaking because he knew I couldn't bear to hear his voice. My first step was choosing to accept it. I didn't have to forgive him yet, not even close. But I could let the coffee be what it was, a simple, warm offering in a cold, silent house. Slowly, the silence started to change. It became a space for listening. One evening, after weeks of the coffee ritual, I found Caleb just sitting in the living room, waiting. He hadn't turned on the TV. He wasn't scrolling on his phone. He was just sitting there. I knew it was an invitation. I sat in the chair opposite him, and I started to talk. I told him everything, how his lie felt like it had erased our entire history, how suspicion had become my shadow, a constant nagging voice in my head. I told him that sometimes I looked at him and saw a complete stranger. The most important part of this was what he didn't do. He didn't interrupt. He didn't get defensive. He didn't try to explain himself or rush me through my pain. He just listened. He let my anger, my hurt, and my confusion fill the space between us, and he held it all. It wasn't about fixing it in that moment. It was about showing me that he was willing to face the damage he'd caused, no matter how ugly. We didn't solve anything that night, but for the first time in a long time, I felt heard. And feeling heard is the beginning of everything. Healing isn't a straight line. There were setbacks. About a month later, A text from an unknown number lit up his phone on the kitchen counter. My heart seized. That familiar, cold dread washed over me in an instant. The fragile truce we'd built felt like it was about to shatter. I saw the panic in Caleb's eyes. He saw my face and knew exactly where my mind had gone. But this time, something was different. Instead of letting the silence swell into a storm, he took a breath and said, very quietly, "I need a minute." He walked out onto the porch, not running away, but creating space. We were learning, slowly, how to stop a fire before it burned the whole house down. When he came back inside 10 minutes later, he showed me the phone. It was a contractor. The relief was overwhelming, but the incident left a tremor. Later that evening, while I was washing dishes, he came up behind me. He didn't say anything. He just placed his hand on the small of my back. It wasn't sexual or even romantic. It was just connection. A small, silent act to reestablish a sense of safety. We stood like that for a long time, breathing together. It was another word in our new language, reassurance. Our real breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday. There was no catalyst, no big event. I think we both just knew we couldn't live in the in-between any longer. We finally had the conversation. This time it was different. We were using I statements, which sounds clinical, but it's incredibly human. I didn't say, "You lied and you broke our marriage." I said, "I felt worthless." I felt like our entire life was a lie that I was the only one believing. And he didn't just apologize again. He shared a part of himself he'd kept hidden. He talked about a period of intense professional failure a year earlier, a deep insecurity he'd never admitted. He spoke of feeling like he was losing himself and, in a moment of profound weakness, had sought validation somewhere else. It didn't excuse what he did, but it gave me the one thing I was missing, his why. It was in that moment he said it. "I know the ghost of this will always be in the room, Ethan, but I want to build new walls around it, with you. Walls that are stronger than what we had before." He was finally taking full ownership, not just for the affair, but for the ongoing work of repairing us. We weren't trying to erase the past anymore. We were finally agreeing to build a future that made space for it. It's been over a year since we learned to speak again. Our home isn't silent anymore. It's filled with a different kind of sound now, a more intentional, mindful conversation. There are still days when the ghost of that second phone makes an appearance, a flicker of doubt in the back of my mind. But now, we have the words to talk about it. Rebuilding trust isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to forgive, over and over, through small, consistent actions and a commitment to honesty. Our new foundation isn't perfect, but it's real. It was built not on the naive idea of a perfect love, but on the hard-won strength of repair. We learned that true intimacy isn't avoiding conflict. It's having the courage to face it together and come out stronger. If you've ever had to rebuild a connection that felt broken, I hope our story gives you a little hope.